I'm going to share with you 5 tips for pond bass fishing that I believe will greatly increase your chances of catching fish this year by helping you understand more about the ponds that you fish and the lures you select. My name's Tyler, and let's talk about it. Another giant. Look at that, y'all. I can't believe what I just caught. Yes! Today's video is brought to you by the Bass Forecast app. More on them to come later in the video. Tip number 1 I have for pond fishing is going to be understanding and utilizing what's called the countdown method. And all the countdown method is knowing how fast your lure sinks once it hits the water, therefore helping you understand how deep you're retrieving your lure. Is it on the bottom, is it in the middle, or is it on the top? And using this method is important for 2 reasons. Number 1, it helps you save money on lures from snags on the bottom, because with lures like a vibrating jig, a lipless crankbait, they are not weedless lures. So if you have sticks and brush piles and rock piles and cables that go across from the fountain to the bank, there's stuff to get stuck on. And by letting your lure sink too much, you run the high likelihood of getting snagged on the bottom. Now, sometimes the fish are on the bottom and you want your lure as close as possible to the bottom. But that leads us to reason number 2 to use the countdown method, and that is to understand how deep it is where you're fishing. The quickest way to learn how fast your lure sinks is to find an area that you know, based on maybe using your rod tip, is about 2 feet deep. I'm gonna take my bait and place it on the top of the water and then drop my rod tip and count how long it takes to drop those 2 feet. Repeating that a few times will help you dial in exactly what that time is, then divide that time by 2, and that's how many feet per second your lure sinks. So I am throwing a vibrating jig and I know that it falls about 1.5 feet every second. So if I cast it out there and as soon as it hits the water, I start counting 1, 2, 3. It took 3 seconds to fall, which means that even on a long cast out there in the middle, 3 times 1.5 feet is 5? Hold up. I'm pretty sure that is 4.5 feet deep. Feel free to correct me though if my math is wrong. I promise that by doing this with every lure you have that sinks, you will quickly understand the contours of your body of water a lot quicker, therefore helping you pick the right lures and catch more fish. Now, understanding tip number 1 is going to help you with tip number 2, which is casting angles and contours. And to help with this, I have the drone up in the sky. Every single pond on planet Earth, including the one that I'm standing next to, has some form of underwater contours. The contours on this pond could look like this, or this, or this, but my guess is they look something like this. And the only reason I can reliably tell you that is because I use the countdown method to understand how deep it is in certain sections, therefore drawing this map by hand. So as an example, I want to look at the corner of this pond, which you see from the drone angle. The bank comes towards me from my left, makes a relatively 90-degree turn right here, and then heads directly this way to my right. And if this is what I believe the contours look like on this corner, that will help me understand where to cast. So if I'm standing here and I make a cast out here into the middle, I am casting into that 6 to 7 feet of water right in the corner. There could be a brush pile there, could be a good grass line there, but if you've been fishing on your pond and you've noticed, hey, all my bites are coming in that 2 to 4 foot water depth, a corner is a great place to stand to have 2 perfect casts where your bait is in the strike zone 100% of the retrieve. So if I'm in the corner and I'm casting right there, a little bit too deep, but that's right in the 4 to 5 foot depth range. And for the majority of the retrieve, it is in that depth range. It only starts to get shallower as the bait gets up towards me here in the corner. And if I don't get a bite there, I can continue to cover water very effectively by making the same cast this direction. That is also going to have my bait in the strike zone for the longest. As you fish your ponds, make sure you are understanding what angle of a cast you're making and how long your bait is staying in the strike zone for. And on a brand new body of water, you might not know exactly how deep it is, but after using the countdown method and tip number 3, which I'll tell you about here in a second, you're gonna better understand your body of water, your pond, and catch more bass. The Bass Forecast app is something that I have had a hand in developing over the last few years, and I truly believe it is the best resource available to quickly help you understand your bodies of water. By just putting in your location, Bass Forecast will spit out a rating from 1 to 10 on how the bass should be behaving on that day on your body of water based on the weather and the bass season. All this data comes together to give you a recommended list of lures, locations, and retrieval speeds. So if you've ever pulled up to the lake or the pond and wondered what would Tyler throw, the app will tell you because I helped build this. The premium version of the app is $10 right now for the entire year, and if you get that, you get a $10 Tackle Warehouse gift card in return. It's basically free. And premium unlocks so many awesome features like 10-day advanced ratings to help you plan your bass fishing trip. Let's get on to tip number 3. Now, tip number 3 for catching more bass in ponds is understanding how the bass are relating to the bank line itself. In the majority of winter and summertime fishing scenarios, the bass are not relating directly to the bank. Now, of course, top water in the summertime, right along the bank, the fish might be up there cruising and feeding in the morning, but as soon as that sun pokes out, those fish are back to the deep water. Same thing in the winter. The water's so cold, the fish might get up shallow if the water warms up in the afternoon, but for the most part, summer and winter, the fish are deeper. But the exact opposite is true in the spring and fall, especially spring, because in the spring, shallow water is what drives everything. It drives the pre-spawn, it drives the spawn and the post-spawn. So if it is spring or fall, I'm not gonna walk immediately up to any bank that I fish. I'm gonna start by fishing at least 10 to 20 feet back, making casts a little bit into the water and then to the bank. And then if I don't get a bite, I'll reel in, cast a little bit left, and fish the bank on this side. And if nothing happens there, I will make another cast, one last one to the right, kind of clearing myself an area to where if I don't get a bite, I can then move up and start fishing down the bank this way and down the bank this way. In the wintertime though, you don't have to worry about that. With the exception of morning topwater, you can get to the pond, walk straight to the bank, and make casts into deeper water. And just like we talked about in the contour section, once you find where those fish are positioned on that day, replicate that. So if I'm going down the bank and I get a bite shallow, I'm talking like within 3 to 4 feet of the bank, I'm gonna know a lot of fish are probably in that mindset, in that stage today. So as I work around the pond, I'm gonna make very similar casts. And if I arrive to the lake early on a summer morning and I stay, far back from the bank here and I catch one on topwater right in front of me, I'm gonna make sure that I stay away from the bank for the entirety of that low light period. It is so crucial to understand how your bass on that day are relating to the bank line to catch the most fish possible. Now, the fourth tip I have for pond bass fishing is to bring everything with you. I have been pond fishing for a long time, and the number one thing I've done is not catch fish. It's not get backlashes or get kicked out of the pond. It is forget stuff at the truck. Whether it's a rod combo I thought I wouldn't need, or a lure I thought I would never throw, or a jacket in case it rains, I am almost always forgetting something. And being a YouTuber, I've got a little more stuff to bring in terms of fishing my filming than most anglers. And so I'm always forgetting camera batteries, microphones, SD cards. There's so many times, despite previous videos of mine telling you guys you don't need a backpack, I have come around to the fact that I need a backpack. And do you need this much stuff to pond fish? Probably not, but it's always better to have everything with you. I'm okay lugging a little bit more stuff than I probably need just so I can be prepared. And as far as rods go, I am a big proponent of carrying multiple rods with me as I bank fish, and that number is usually 2 to 3, sometimes 4, but I like to stick in the 2 to 3 range. Now, what rods do I think are the best for pond fishing if you're only gonna take 3? I think you need, regardless of season, a reaction bait slash Texas rig jig rod, a big bait, so a topwater, a big jig, big worm type rod, and you need a finesse rod. I don't care what pond you're in, there's gonna be times where they're not biting the fun stuff, the vibrating jigs, the square bill crankbaits, and they're gonna bite a Ned rig, a shaky head, drop shot, a wacky rig. So I always carry at least one spinning rod, and then if it is like winter time, springtime, they're not biting topwater down here in Texas, they're not biting a whole lot of big baits, and so I throw a lot of moving baits, especially slow moving. So vibrating jigs, a hybrid hunter, a shallow diving crankbait, a lipless crankbait, a jerkbait. So I keep 2 of these rods, but the rest of the year, summertime, fall, spring, they're biting a frog, they're biting a big topwater walking bait, a 6-inch swim bait. So I have that 7-4 heavy with me that replaces one of these reaction bait rods. Now, of course, you don't need 3 rods to bass fish, but I think 3 is a good amount to carry around with the backpack on your back without being too cumbersome, but still giving you the ability to switch out lures quickly or not switch them out at all, drop one rod and pick up another one. 3 rods makes you a very versatile pond fisherman. Any more, I think, is overkill. And lastly, for tip number 5, I want to talk about my 2 favorite lures that have produced the most fish for me, have been the most consistent, and that's why I keep them either tied on or close in my tackle bag every single time I go pond fishing. And the first one of those is a reaction bait. Now, I live in Texas, and so for the most part, the water in my ponds does not get crazy cold. I mean, it gets into the 40s for sure, but bass in that water temperature can still bite a reaction lure. And if they can still bite it in the 40s, I would guess they can still bite it in the upper 30s. So regardless of water temperature, of water clarity, of cover and structure, bottom composition, the reaction bait that I always have tied on or in my tackle bag ready to tie on is the vibrating jig. This here is the Strike King Thunder Cricket. I don't care how much your vibrating jig costs or what brand you use, you need a few in your tackle box because they just catch fish everywhere. And I know that the argument can be made, well, you know, the more people that throw a lure, the more a fish gets used to it and therefore they won't bite it as often. In ponds, I haven't found that to be the case. The pond behind me is heavily pressured and I catch fish almost every time I come here on the vibrating jig if I need a bite. Now, your confidence moving bait for ponds might be a spinnerbait. So for you, always have that tied on. It might be a square bill crankbait. It might be a jerkbait. But for me, it's a vibrating jig. So find the lure that works for you that you can cover water with and you're confident in getting bites, because for me, in the ponds that I fish, the vibrating jig just gets it done. So as always, I will leave my tackle linked in the video description. The more you guys can shop through those links, the more it helps the TRF channel continue to grow. And the second lure that I think every angler needs to be throwing, regardless of your pond, is this one right here. And yes, it's blurred because I've made an entire video on why this lure is so good for every pond. I will leave that video up here in that corner, so click that if you want to watch it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button and I'll see you in that video.